You don't have to go and quit your job and go all in if you're not wired like me, but do something. Take one step. Start the website, make a hire, ask her to marry you. Just take one step. And I guarantee you, only one of two things are going to happen. That's it. There's only two possible scenarios. Scenario one, I think that's the part of business is nice that, seeing these things are all your baby. Sometimes your baby's ugly, but seeing them survive you and building real businesses and kind of going through, whether you got earnouts or just, it's a good thing to kind of see. It's nice. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. So when you look at
the other question you asked, would you do it again? And the answer is yes, I would have, because if, the company we've got now called True Diagnostic, we're looking at biological age and epigenetics. I mean, that company at the time of the raid and this whole thing happened with the FDA, I had $1 million in equipment for this new company, True, that had been in the warehouse for 6 months and it was just sitting there. So, I can go down just like the path of losing $2 million and complain and say, oh, woe is me. And this is like, I'm such a victim. I could say, oh, I'm the victim for not taking the 600 million, or that happened for me and now gave me the catalyst to go and buy another building during COVID and launch a new company. And that company is my second Inc. 500 company. I think we were 50th or something last year in the Inc. 500. So everything works out for a reason. It's got to keep moving forward and changing your perspective on failure. Because failure, I do not believe that anything good happens to you or anything bad happens to you. I think life's a series of events, and it's the actions and the emotion that you apply to those events that will later determine if they were a good thing or a bad thing.
It's interesting that kind of philosophy that you mentioned, because a really wealthy friend of mine, I was on his boat one year and kicking around, and I asked him the question. I said to him, here you are, you've made your first million at 20 some years old, and now you're making millions daily. What's how do you do that? What's the secret to all that? And he said to me, and I'm just me and him, and he looks at me, he goes, I don't make mistakes. And I kind of paused and I go, it was like in my brain, I went, wow, that's really arrogant. And so I didn't say anything. That was what I was thinking. But there was this pause. And then he said, I just get a result. And I either like it or I don't. And if I don't like it, I put in the correction, or I kick the whole idea to the curb and redo it. Because everybody looks at this and looks at what they do and they made a mistake. No, it's not a mistake. You just did your shit. You didn't get the result you wanted. It's not a mistake. And he doesn't even think in terms of mistakes. He only thinks in terms of, I got a result. I either like the result or I didn't like the result. I either kick it to the curb or I put in the correction and keep moving on. And so he was at that point, 70 years old. So, a lot of years in the saddle, and he'd always been wired, or he'd got himself wired way early in his career. I don't make mistakes. And I went, wow, it was kind of a profound thought process. I haven't evolved to be that way, by the way, but I went, oh, sometimes I kick back to that when I go off the rails.
No, it's so smart. I mean, I see so many entrepreneurs that, either want to have an idea, want to start something and this never do, or hey, I've been doing this long and do I buy the company? Do I make the product line extension, or, whatever it is, to make that step. And, the title of my book is called Without a Plan. And the subtitle is a memoir of unbound action and failing my way to success. And I've learned nothing from the successes, everything from the failures, and action and forward momentum will be your savior forever. And, maybe you're not as crazy, and I'm wired this way. I perform better if it's cards are stacked against me and my back's against the wall. So I find
Mhm.
myself sometimes putting myself in fucking situations I call. So I'm like, why are you making this harder on yourself? But it's because like I'll work better. I don't.
Yeah,
That's for
it's a
another therapy
pattern.
day. But
Yeah,
but you don't have to go and quit your job and go all in if you're not wired like me. But do something. Take one step. Right. Start the website. Make a hire. Ask her to marry you. Just take one step, and I guarantee you only one of two things are going to happen. That's it. There's only two possible scenarios. Scenario one is you're going to do it, whatever that step is, and it works. Great. Works. Then that's going to give you confidence to take another step, another step.
yeah,
The other scenario was even better. It doesn't work, right? That's your hope. It doesn't work because so much your mistake thing. That's going to give you that confidence. Like, oh well, that didn't work, but I'm fucking not dead. The world's the sun's still up. Like it's oh my god. So there, and get, what do you have? What are you left with when it didn't work? More information. Now you know more. Like okay, that didn't work. So to your buddy's point on the boat, let's go and now with new information, try and do it again, and then that works. So see how I mean? Like it's those when you can boil it down
yeah,
to what happens, and then the last piece is just from a mindset component. um, Everyone asks themselves their own questions. Like, what if I do this? And you've been doing podcasts for 8 years. What if I do this podcast and everyone? I'm sure you're like, well, maybe no one listens. Well, no one likes it or whatever.
yeah.
Okay, what if it does work? Right?
Mhm.
We always live into the negative. Right? What if it does? What if it does go and it does catch fire and I've got hundreds of thousands of views every month and downloads and 8 years going and I meet all these really cool people? What's that done for your life? And now, as when you said in the green room, like this has become a bit of your um, identity of who
Brand.
you are.
Yeah,
8 years ago, you were not
yeah,
a podcast. You know what I mean? So I think that's a question to ask. What if it does? And then you've heard this quote. I don't know where I heard it, but I've seen it a couple of times. Like, how big would you dream if you knew you could not fail? And I think
yeah,
that's the most like profound thing. And
yeah,
another way of hearing is like the definition of hell is meeting the person you could have become.
yeah. There's an interesting, that there's so people use quotes all the time, and I go, listen, those quotes, when you look at a lot of these quotes, they're so valuable if you apply them. If you don't apply them, then there's just another quote that sounded good. I
It's a
use the
bumper
quote.
sticker or a T-shirt. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly. I always use the quote. If more information was the answer, we'd all be billionaires with six packs, right? So it's like we don't need more information. We need a context, and we need to take an action and execute on an idea. I mean, there's so many great philosophically things that we need to kind of get into. And to your point, there's a quote that I often go back to that I use, in whether it's in myself or my coaching or whatever, and that is that the quality of our life is a reflection of the quality of the questions we ask ourselves. And to your point, people in general, I'm guilty of it, you're guilty of it, we don't ask ourselves the right question. We ask ourselves one question or two questions really high level. And, my guidance for myself, by the way, as well as others, is you're not asking yourself the right question. You need to dig until when you get to the right question, you know it, you feel it. It like often is the case. We just don't ask ourselves the right question. Like, what if I fail is not the fucking question to ask yourself. It's a wrong question. I like the other side of that. Well, what happens if it works? That's a different question, right? And so we don't ask ourselves great questions and force ourselves to think and engage our brain in a way that gets creative and supports whatever it is that we're doing. So I don't know where I'm going with that little rant, but I really appreciate the fact that, I agree 100%. We don't ask ourselves great questions.
Yeah. Well, just to add to it, because I agree completely. I have a rule, and people should just do this and save yourself the 10 grand a month as a client. But like, um, is why the fuck are you doing this,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if your answer is for a fucking car to stand in front of on Instagram, or like if that's your
Or
answer,
money.
like
Yeah.
you're so gone. And but the reality is like that's okay. Like, but I usually try and go 3 or 4 layers in. Okay, but why? And I'm trying to find out their why, and I just ask why. Well, I don't know. I
Yeah.
never grew up with a car. Okay, well let's talk. Let's dig in there, and you peel back that onion, and because and I ask these questions because this is from the guy that for a period of my life, I was buying all the cars and watches and houses and all that shit because I was miserable and I wasn't happy. I was trying to go through it. I still have all those things, but the why I have them are different, right? I did a video the other day, like making fun of Ty Lopez, like the whole here in my garage thing,
Yeah.
and I was like, here's my Ferrari, and then there's another car, but it was like it was cringy. It was hard to do, and
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
don't know Ty Lopez, like it doesn't kind of resonate. You're like, wow, this guy's a douchebag. But I was making fun of it, and the idea, like, yeah, I bought this Ferrari when I was miserable and happy. It's my first supercar, and I'll never get rid of it. Like my 11-year-old son loves cars, but this '67 Shelby fastback that we have, like that looks like Gone in 60 Seconds, Nick Cage. My son and I found that as a California car, found it in a barn in Ohio, and did a 3-year rotisserie restoration on it. That car is consistent with my why. It's
Mm.
Sunday drives. He has hair, I don't, so I can't really say when to my hair. But that's consistent with your why. That like, okay, yeah, it's a cool car, it's expensive, and like whatever the bullshit, but like it's stopping to get ice cream, having a conversation on a Sunday, listening to music with the windows down. Like that's okay. So I don't want to shame wealth and shame success because I think some people do that. Resources are great, but it can't be your only reason why. You got to figure out that why. And when you do that and you're consistent with that, you're really fucking hard to stop, man. You are
Mm.
really hard to stop because you're playing at a different game. Like you're now like it's now about impact and kind of going through and like even from a sales perspective, like you need to be so obsessed with your product that like if you don't buy my product, Pat, I'm calling you Pat. I think it was Patrick, but if you don't buy my product, I'm gonna hurt because you need it. Like I feel like Dan Kennedy was like the best at this. Like he literally kind of said like if you don't buy it, I don't want you to buy it. But I have to because if you don't get this, you're going to be worse off. And if you
Yeah.
were that passionate and emphatic about your product, it's fucking hard to mess with you, man. It really is because you believe and you're helping people. You're making that impact. So
Yeah.
if you can do that, but you can't do it if your motivation is what you're putting the key in to go home.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. It's interesting that you brought that up. A good friend of mine was selling uh, I don't know, dog food, but it was whatever, organic, healthy, blah blah blah. And he was the top sales guy in the country by far. Like nobody was even close to him. So I'm having my conversation with Lambert, and I go, dude, like, how do you do that? And he looks at me, and goes, well, because they need this. And he's selling direct to veterinarians and that kind of stuff. And I go, well, what do you mean? He goes, because they need this shit. Like it drives me crazy that they don't understand. And I realized in that moment that's exactly what you described. And most sales guys don't have that passion. They don't have that fundamental belief.
The
Like
belief, the belief, yeah.
you don't want it. Like, okay, hold on just a second.
You
Maybe
must
you
not
didn't
understand.
hear me. You
Yeah,
don't understand what I'm
clearly,
saying.
yeah,
Let me say it a different way. Like it's like
yeah.
by the time they're done, it's like, yeah, I get it. Okay, right, you're right. I gotta buy this.
Yeah.
So